The rain beat against the tall sash windows of Buckingham Palace, a persistent drumming that matched the somber mood inside the private drawing room where the most senior members of the royal family had gathered. It had been nearly a year since the death of Queen Elizabeth II, yet the grief still felt raw, a fresh wound for the nation and a private chasm of loss for those who had known her best. King Charles III sat in a high-backed chair, and his expression a mixture of weariness and kingly composure. Beside him, Queen Camilla rested a comforting hand on his arm. Across from them, the Prince of Wales, William, stood with his back to the roaring fire, his jaw tight with unspoken tension. The only other person in the room was the Princess Royal, Anne. She had requested this meeting, her usually brisk and businesslike demeanor replaced by something far more solemn. In her hands, she clutched a simple, unadorned envelope. For the air in the room was thick with anticipation. These family gatherings, once frequent and warm under the Queen's stewardship, had become rarer and fraught with the complexities of a new reign and very public family strife. William shifted his weight, glancing at his father. The silence was broken by Anne. "There's something you both need to hear," she began, her voice steadier than anyone else's in the room could have managed. "Something your mother left for us. For this moment." Charles looked up, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He knew his sister well enough to understand that she did not deal in theatrics. If Anne had called them here, it was a matter of profound importance. "Go on, Anne," Charles said, his voice quiet. Anne held up the envelope. It was cream-colored, bearing the royal cipher, and sealed with a blob of deep red wax. "This is a letter from Mama. It's not an official document. It's not a state paper. It's a personal message. She gave it to me just a few weeks before she died. She told me to keep it safe and to read it to you both when the time was right." She paused, her own eyes glistening. "I believe that time is now." William stepped forward, his curiosity now fully ignited. "What does it say, Aunt Anne?" he asked. Anne didn't answer verbally. Instead, she carefully broke the seal, the crack of the wax echoing in the silent room. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, covered in the Queen's distinctive, elegant handwriting. She took a deep breath and began to read aloud. "To my son, Charles, and my grandson, William. If you are hearing these words, it means I am gone, and Anne has judged that a moment has come when you need to hear my voice beyond the grave." Charles leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. William felt his heart clench at the sound of his grandmother's words, so familiar, so full of her unique blend of duty and love. Anne continued reading. The letter spoke of her love for them, her pride in Charles's readiness for the kingship, and her faith in William's future. But then, the tone shifted. "There is a matter that lies heavily on my heart," Anne read, her voice dropping slightly, though it remained perfectly clear. "In my long life, I have seen the crown passed through war, through scandal, and through immense change. I have seen the family tested, but I have also seen its future secured, not always by those born to it, but by those who choose to serve it with their whole hearts." She paused, looking up at the two men. "She's talking about Catherine," Anne said softly, before returning to the letter. "I have watched Catherine since the day William brought her to Balmoral. I have seen her navigate a world she did not grow up in with a grace that cannot be taught. She has carried burdens that many do not see. She has faced a storm of scrutiny that would have broken lesser souls. She has not flinched. She has not faltered. She has absorbed the pressure and transformed it into strength for her family and for her duty. She is not merely family, she is the spine of the future." At these words, the composure in the room shattered. Charles, who had kept his emotions tightly in check for the public eye, felt a tear escape and run down his cheek. He made no move to wipe it away. William, The strong and protective husband felt his eyes well up, a lump forming in his throat so large he could barely breathe. The queen, his granny, had seen it all. She had seen the quiet dignity of his wife, the struggles she faced in the shadows, the way she held the family together. This was more than a compliment. It was a benediction from the only person whose opinion had ever truly mattered in that world. It was a royal endorsement so profound, so unexpected, that it left them both utterly speechless. The initial shock of Princess Anne's revelation began to settle, replaced by a deep and resonant silence that filled the room. Anne folded the letter carefully, her own hands trembling slightly. She looked at her brother and her nephew, witnessing the raw emotion on their faces, a vulnerability rarely seen in the gilded cage of royalty. King Charles was the first to speak, his voice hoarse. "She wrote this for Catherine?" He wasn't questioning the authenticity, but processing the magnitude of it. His mother, known for her emotional reserve in public, had poured such profound feeling into these private words. Anne nodded. She knew the pressures would not ease after she was gone. She knew there would be challenges. The word hung in the air, a clear reference to the ongoing tensions with the Sussexes and the intense media scrutiny that had only intensified since the Queen's death. She wanted Catherine to know that her value was seen, not just by the public, but by the one person whose approval is the foundation of this family's endurance. William finally found his voice, though it cracked with emotion. She always knew. Granny always knew how hard it was for Kate. She would tell her privately, in little ways. A quiet word of encouragement, a knowing look. But this... He trailed off, looking at the letter as if it were a sacred relic. This is everything. This is her legacy being passed on. Charles stood up, moving to the window to look out at the gray London sky. The weight of the crown was immense, but this moment added a different kind of weight. The weight of his mother's wisdom, delivered posthumously. He thought of Catherine, his daughter-in-law, who was at that very moment facing one of the most difficult periods of her life. She was recovering from major abdominal surgery, and the absence from public duties had ignited a firestorm of vile speculation and conspiracy theories online. And the very press that had once celebrated her was now dissecting her every absence, creating a toxic narrative that she was somehow fragile or troubled. He turned back to face Anne and William. "The timing of this, Anne. You said Mama wanted you to read this at the right time." "Why now?" he asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Anne met his gaze unflinchingly. "Because Catherine is under attack. Not from enemies abroad, but from the very forces my mother feared most. The unthinking cruelty of the modern world, the relentless noise. She is ill, she is recovering, and yet the speculation about her marriage, her health, her mental state, it is relentless. Mama would not have stood for it. And now, with this letter, we cannot stand for it either. We have to protect her, not just as family, but as the spine of the future my mother believed her to be." William's expression hardened. He had felt so helpless, and watching his wife suffer in silence while the world gossiped. He had wanted to lash out, to issue statements, to defend her honor. But Kate, in her wisdom, had counseled patience and dignity. Now, here was proof that her approach was the right one. The Queen had seen it. She had predicted it. "We need to tell her," William said suddenly. "Kate needs to hear these words, not just the sentiment, but the actual words. She needs to know that Granny believed in her, that she was her chosen successor in spirit." The decision was made. They would go to Windsor. They would share the letter with Catherine. But even as they prepared to leave, the weight of the secret they now carried was immense. The world outside the palace walls had no idea that a bombshell was about to be dropped. not on the public, but on the very heart of the royal family itself. Anne tucked the letter safely back into its envelope, a physical embodiment of the late Queen's final. A stunning message about the woman she believed would safeguard the monarchy for generations to come. The drive from London to Windsor Castle was a blur for William. He sat in the back of the state car, the Queen's letter now resting in his own hands, cradled as if it were made of the most delicate glass. His mind raced, picturing Kate's face when he would read her these words. They had been through so much together, the media circus of their courtship, the wedding, the births of their children, on the heartbreaking rift with Harry, and now, her terrifying health scare. Through it all, Kate had remained the anchor, the calm in the storm. But William knew the toll it had taken. He saw the tiredness in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. He felt the tension in her shoulders when another negative headline appeared. This letter, he hoped, would be the balm her soul desperately needed. At Windsor, they found Kate in a private sitting room, a soft blanket over her legs, as a book open on her lap. She looked pale but managed a warm, questioning smile as they entered. Charles and Anne followed close behind. The formality of the setting vanished as family took over. "This is a surprise," Kate said, her voice gentle. "Is everything all right?" William crossed the room and sat beside her on the sofa, taking her hand. "Something incredible has happened," he began. He then told her about the meeting at the palace, about Anne's solemn delivery, and finally, about the letter. As he spoke, Kate's eyes widened, a flicker of apprehension crossing her features. When he unfolded the paper and began to read the Queen's words aloud, "Catherine has carried burdens that many do not see. She has not flinched. She has not faltered. She is not merely family. She is the spine of the future." The apprehension melted away, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated emotion. Tears streamed down Kate's face, silent and unstoppable. She brought a hand to her mouth, trying to contain the sob that threatened to escape. For over a decade, she had performed her duties with a smile, accepting the praise and the criticism with equal grace. She had been called a commoner, a duchess, a princess. She had been compared to Diana, to Wallis Simpson, to every woman who had ever married into the monarchy, but never, not once, had she ever felt truly seen by the institution itself. She was a cog in a very old, very grand machine. But this was different. That this was the Queen, the woman who was the institution, seeing her. Not the Princess of Wales, but Catherine, the woman, the mother, the wife, the spine of the future. "She called me the spine," Kate whispered, her voice thick with tears. Charles, standing behind William, placed a hand on his daughter-in-law's shoulder. "She did. And she was right. My mother was many things, but she was never wrong about character." His voice was thick with his own emotion. Camilla, standing beside him, nodded in agreement, her own eyes suspiciously bright. She knew what it was like to be vilified by the press, to be the subject of intense public scrutiny. Her heart went out to Kate. Anne, who had remained near the door, allowing the family this private moment, finally stepped forward. "My mother trusted you with the future, Catherine. Not because of your title, but because of who you are. There was a reason she asked you to call her Mama. There was a reason you were the one she wanted by her side in her final years. She saw your strength. And now, in these difficult days, you must draw on that strength. We all must." For Kate, the moment was transformative. The months of speculation about her health, the cruel jokes on social media, the relentless pressure to appear perfect, it all suddenly felt manageable. She had been anointed, not with oil and pomp at a coronation, but with